I was lying in a hospital bed with a 7-inch surgical scar across my left side when I heard her laugh. I know his laugh is what you'd expect me to say, but it was hers I heard first, soft and particular, floating through the wall between our rooms like it had every right to be there. Like everything in that hospital corridor belonged to her. 3 hours out of surgery, still coming down from anesthesia, still feeling the hollow place where something that used to be mine no longer was. And in the room directly to my left, through a wall thin enough to carry sound, my husband's mistress was laughing at something on her phone. I didn't know she was his mistress yet. That came later. What came in that moment was a feeling I couldn't name, a low, instinctive alarm. The kind your body registers before your mind is caught up, the kind that says something here is wrong before you can tell it what. I am going to tell you this story from the beginning because the beginning matters for understanding what the hospital room means. What I gave, what was taken from me in exchange for it, and what I did when I finally understood the full picture of what my marriage had actually been. Before I do, please subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment when we get to the part that makes your blood boil. It will be soon. My name is Laura. I'm 38 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, in a house I bought myself 6 months ago, with 2 dogs and a vegetable garden that is doing better than anyone expected, including me. My left kidney is inside a man who spent 12 years lying to my face. I cannot get it back. I have made my peace with that. I have also made sure that the peace I've made is the only thing he gets to keep from what we had. But let me take you back 3 years. To a Tuesday in February, to a doctor's office with pale blue walls and a very nice woman named Dr. Simmons who told my husband Daniel that his kidneys were failing. Daniel and I had been married for 9 years at that point. We were, from the outside and I believed from the inside too, a solid couple. The kind people hold up when they're trying to make a point about what a good marriage looks like. We had met at a work conference in Atlanta, both of us in healthcare administration, and built something steadily over a decade. We bought a house in a good neighborhood. We had routines we loved, and some we'd outgrown, and were renegotiating. We had arguments about money and time, and whose turn it was to call the plumber, and we got through them the way reasonably functional people get through things. I was happy. Genuinely. Unperformatively happy in the way you don't appreciate until it's gone. The kidney disease was not entirely a surprise. Daniel had a genetic condition, a diagnosis that had come in his early 30s, that put him at elevated risk. We had known about it for years. We had managed it, monitored it, adjusted his diet, gone to appointments. We had talked about the possibility of dialysis and the possibility of transplant the way you talk about the fire exit on an airplane, abstractly, in the tone of things that might matter but hopefully won't. And then one Tuesday in February, Dr. Simmons sat across from us and said the numbers had moved significantly and it was time to stop talking abstractly. He was going to need a transplant, probably within 18 months. Dialysis would buy time, but his quality of life would deteriorate substantially in the meantime. There was the transplant list, with its notoriously long wait times. And there was the option of a living donor. I know what you're thinking. I know because I have had the conversation many times in the years since with friends and therapists and my divorce attorney and a few strangers on the internet who found the story and had opinions about it. You're thinking, did you feel pressured? Did you decide too fast? Did you fully understand what you were agreeing to? The answer to all of those is no. No, I didn't feel pressured. No, I didn't decide too fast. I understood exactly what I was agreeing to. I was tested over several weeks. The blood type and tissue matching and a battery of physical and psychological evaluations designed to make sure you are the kind of person who can genuinely consent to giving an organ to someone else. I passed all of them. I was a compatible match. And I decided, after real, careful, uncoerced deliberation, to give my husband one of my kidneys. I want to be honest about why. Not because it was dramatically romantic or self-sacrificing in some way that makes a good story, but because the reason was simple and true. I loved him. I had loved him for 9 years. He was healthy in every other way and would have decades of good life ahead of him with a functioning kidney, and I had 2 and could live perfectly well with 1, and I loved him, and that was it. That was the whole calculation. The surgery was scheduled for March. 6 weeks of pre-operative preparation. More tests. Consultations, with the transplant team. A social worker meeting to discuss what recovery would look like for both of us. A very earnest conversation with a coordinator about what would happen if I changed my mind at any point, including at the last possible moment, and that there would be no judgment and no consequence. I did not change my mind. I want to tell you about the 6 weeks before the surgery, because there is something in them that matters to the story. In retrospect, knowing what I know now, those 6 weeks read very differently than they did when I was living them. But I will tell you how they felt first, because that is the honest version, and the honest version is the only one that makes sense of what came after. Daniel was attentive during those weeks in a way that struck me as moving, and that I now understand was something else. He brought me coffee in the morning, appearing in the bedroom doorway with it before I was fully awake, something he had done early in our relationship and then, as relationships do, had let quietly lapse. He cooked on weekends, elaborate and ambitious meals that he had clearly looked up in advance, apologizing endlessly for the mess while the kitchen filled with the smell of something good. He was physically present in a way that I can now see was guilt making itself available as closeness, a distinction that is meaningless while you're experiencing it and obvious afterward. He was also, I noticed in the way you notice things that don't quite register, occasionally distracted. His phone, which he always had somewhere nearby, would sometimes pull his attention in a way that felt fractionally too private. Not dramatic phone behavior. Nothing that would trip any normal alarm. Just a quality of attention directed at a small screen that was slightly too concentrated for a man checking sports scores. I noticed it and filed it under stress and moved on. He said things to me in those 6 weeks that had the quality of things stored up for a long time. He told me he didn't know how I could love him the way I did. He said he didn't deserve me. He said it more than once, at different times, in different contexts, and each time I heard it as a man being laid bare by fear and illness and gratitude, a man feeling the unfairness of needing so much from someone who loved him that freely. I held his face when he said it. I told him of course he deserved me. I told him we were going to be fine. I did not understand then that he meant it as a statement of fact, that it was not the vulnerability of illness speaking, that he meant every word in the most precise, literal sense possible. He did not deserve me. He knew it exactly. He said it 6 times in 6 weeks, and let me talk him out of it every time. The morning of the surgery, we arrived at the hospital at 5:30. There is something about hospital waiting areas at 5:30 in the morning that is unlike any other space, a particular quality of fluorescent-lit silence, of people sitting with their fear in institutional chairs, each person a whole private universe of anxiety and love. I held Daniel's hand. A nurse came to get him first, since his procedure would begin before mine. He squeezed my hand so hard it left marks. He told me he loved me. He said thank you, in a way that had a weight to it I could not interpret in the moment. I was prepped and taken back about an hour later. The last thing I saw before anesthesia was the ceiling of an operating room, which is not an interesting ceiling, just acoustic tile and surgical lights, and I remember thinking, this is what it looks like when you love someone past the point of keeping count. I woke up in recovery. The first sensation was the scar. Not pain exactly, more presence, the awareness of something happening in my left side that wasn't happening before. Anesthesia coming off is its own strange country, your thoughts moving through wet cement, your sense of time completely unreliable. A nurse told me the surgery had gone well. She told me Daniel was out of surgery and in his room, and everything was proceeding as expected. I remember feeling a wave of something I can only call uncomplicated relief, simple and total, the relief of a person who has done a frightening thing and come through the other side of it. I was moved to my recovery room about 2 hours after waking. The transplant coordinator had mentioned, in the preoperative conversations, that the hospital tried to place donors and recipients on the same corridor when the logistics allowed. Patients often found it meaningful, she'd said, to be near each other during recovery. Close enough to know the other person was there. Far enough apart for each person to have their own experience of the aftermath. My room was 412. Daniel's was 408, 4 doors down on the right. I noted this as Brianna wheeled me in, the distance between us, 4 doors and a corridor, 30 feet perhaps, separating the person who had received the organ from the person who had given it. In between us and adjacent to my room on the left, room 410. Empty when I arrived, door standing open, bed freshly made. I was settled in my room by mid-afternoon. Monitors attached. Pain medication administered through the 4 in a way that took the sharpest edge off the left side discomfort without removing it entirely, which my doctor had told me was intentional and was how it was going to be for a while. The room was small and beige and had a window that looked out at the hospital parking structure, which is not a view but is at least evidence that the outside world continues to exist. There was a chair beside the bed for a visitor. No one was in it yet. Brianna, my primary nurse for the afternoon, checked on me every hour. She had the specific quality that distinguishes the best nurses from the technically competent ones, a genuineness that did not feel performed, an interest in me as a person rather than a patient, a way of asking how I was doing that suggested she actually wanted the answer. She told me my numbers were good. She told me the surgery had been textbook. She told me I should sleep when I could and eat when the food arrived and that she would be back in an hour. I was exhausted. The particular exhaustion that follows the combination of general anesthesia and major surgery, and a morning of being afraid, and an hour of relief, which is its own brand of tired. The satisfaction of having done a hard thing still sat in my chest like something warm. I had given my husband a kidney. He was 4 doors down, and his body was already beginning the work of incorporating what I had given him. Everything, as far as I knew, was proceeding exactly as it should. I closed my eyes. I drifted. Some time later, still in the half-world between sleep and waking, I became aware of the room next door. Not dramatically. Not in a way that pulled me fully conscious. Just the sounds of a hospital room receiving its next occupant, the low exchanges with nursing staff, the specific sequence of sounds that indicates a person being transferred into a bed and getting their monitors attached. And then a laugh. Coming through the wall, as clearly as if there were no wall. Soft. Not loud. Just a particular note of amusement at something, brief, quickly over. The kind of laugh that belongs to a specific person, individual enough to be recognizable to someone who knows the person, indistinguishable to someone who doesn't. I did not know this person, but something in my body registered that laugh before my conscious mind had any opinion about it at all. A low animal awareness, the kind that doesn't have a reason, just a signal. Something here. I opened my eyes to the ceiling. I was in a hospital room on painkillers one day after organ donation surgery, and I told myself firmly and clearly that I was registering a stranger laughing through a hospital wall and attributing significance to it because my nervous system had been through a great deal and was overinterpreting stimuli. This was a completely reasonable explanation. I held it deliberately. I went back to sleep. Brianna was checking my vitals at around 4 in the afternoon when I asked her if I could see Daniel. She said she'd check with his care team and see if I was stable enough to be wheeled down. She came back 20 minutes later looking slightly apologetic and said Daniel was resting and his team preferred to minimize visitors in the first post-operative day and that she'd see if she could arrange something in the morning. I was disappointed but not concerned. I understood. I told her that was fine and asked if I could have another blanket, and she brought me one. I was lying under my new blanket, trying to read something on my phone and finding concentration elusive when the door to room 410 opened and a voice floated into the corridor. Not words, just a tone. Warm, easy, the tone of someone talking to a person they know very well. My door was slightly ajar. The voice in the corridor said, "I just got off the phone with Daniel. He says he's doing well." Another voice, quieter, from inside 410. "Did you tell him you're here?" First voice. "Not yet. I don't want to stress him out. He doesn't need to be managing my feelings right now." Quiet voice. "That's very mature of you." A sound that might have been a laugh. "Well, I've had a lot of practice." The door to 410 closed. The corridor went quiet. I lay in my bed with the phone face down on my chest, and I did not move for a long time. The voice had said she'd just spoken to Daniel. She was talking about managing his feelings. She didn't want to stress him out. There are 1,000 explanations for a conversation like that. A colleague, a close friend, a family member of some kind, perhaps a cousin or a sister-in-law. I didn't know well. There are so many innocent explanations for a woman in a hospital room next to mine who had apparently just been on the phone with my husband. I told myself these things in order, firmly. I closed my eyes. I made myself breathe slowly. But the alarm that had registered during the laugh that morning had not gone away. It had simply been waiting. And now it was louder. The next morning, I felt well enough to insist on being taken to see Daniel. Brianna helped me into a wheelchair, noting with professional approval that I had more color than yesterday, and rolled me down the corridor. The hallway was the particular beige of hospital corridors everywhere, institutional and impersonal, lined with closed doors behind which other people were in their own private emergencies. The door to room 410 was closed. I looked at it as we passed. I told myself to stop. Daniel's room had a window. The light was coming through it at the specific angle of winter morning in Nashville, low and gold, and it fell across him in the bed in a way that made him look simultaneously fragile and better than he had in months. The specific gray that kidney failure deposits in a person's complexion over time had already begun to lift. There was color in his face. He was tired and in some managed pain and clearly aware that his body was doing something enormous, but he looked like himself in a way that he hadn't quite in the preceding year, and seeing that, despite everything my nervous system was holding from the previous afternoon, made something in my chest do the thing it had always done when I saw him well. He saw me come in, and his face moved. Complicated and immediate. He said my name, just Laura. The way he used to say it in the first years, when we were still learning each other, and a name was its own small intimacy. I took his hand. We talked for 40 minutes. Easy and warm, and the way we had always been in hospital rooms, having spent enough time in them over the preceding year to develop a kind of fluency, a particular register of honesty and practicality that cuts through ordinary social noise because you are both too aware of what is real to bother with what isn't. He asked about my numbers. He apologized for not being able to check in on me the previous evening. I told him not to worry about it, that I'd been resting, that everything was as expected. I did not mention the laugh. I did not mention the corridor voice. By the time I left his room, rolled back down the corridor past closed doors including 410, I had almost fully persuaded myself that the previous afternoon had been a fever, a medication artifact, a nervous system in post-surgical overdrive interpreting completely innocent sounds with unwarranted darkness. I was back in room 412 for approximately 2 hours before my phone rang with a Nashville number I didn't recognize. And almost fully persuaded became meaningless. At some point in the early afternoon, my phone rang. I had been resting with my eyes closed, not quite sleeping, moving through a particular post-surgical state where you are too tired to be awake and too present to be fully asleep. The ring pulled me back. Nashville number. Not one in my contacts. Is this Laura Nichols? The voice was careful. Not uncertain, but making a deliberate choice to be gentle. Yes, I said. My name is Tessa Hale. I'm in room 410. Right next to you. The ceiling of room 412 did not move. My hand tightened slightly on the phone. I don't know that name, I said. Which was true. I had never heard it, but something in my chest had already been waiting. I know, she said. We've never met. I'm a friend of Daniel's. A pause. More than a friend. I've been trying to figure out how to say this since yesterday, and I don't think there's a good way, so I'm going to say it directly. I'm sorry to do it this way. I know you had surgery yesterday. I know this is a terrible time. I had a minor procedure myself, unrelated to Daniel's situation. I didn't know he was here until I arrived. Say what you need to say, I said. My voice was extremely calm. I was, again, some distance from my own body, hovering somewhere slightly above the moment. The way you go when something is arriving that you cannot handle in real time, and so you step just far enough back to receive it. I've been in a relationship with Daniel for 2 years, she said. I'm so sorry. The phone was in my hand. I was in a hospital bed, where my left kidney used to be. My husband was 4 doors down. The woman who had been sleeping with him for 2 years was 1 door over, and she had picked up her phone and called me, and the thing she was saying was true. I could feel that it was true the way you feel things that have been waiting for you.
How long? I said.
Exactly. A little over 2 years. The timing assembled itself automatically. 2 years ago, what were we doing? What was happening in our marriage 2 years ago? I could feel the specific moments that now required recontextualization, small things, evenings with a particular quality of distraction, a trip he took for work that had run 3 days longer than expected, a period where he had been more present, more deliberate, more careful with me, the way a person is careful when they are managing something they are afraid of losing. All of it landing differently. All of it finding new explanations that fit it better. Did he know? I said. Before the surgery was scheduled, before I was evaluated. Did he know about you and him when all of that was being planned? The pause was longer than the others. Not hesitation, I thought. Accuracy. The pause of a person making sure they say exactly what is true. Yes, she said. I asked him to tell you. I'm not saying this to make myself look better. I asked him more than once to be honest with you before you made any decision about the donation. He said it was complicated. He said he would handle it after. The phone was in my hand. I put it down on the bed beside me without hanging up. I simply set it down gently, the way you set down something whose weight you have just fully understood for the first time. 2 years. My kidney had been inside Daniel for slightly less than 24 hours. He had been sleeping with someone else for 2 years. He had sat across from me in Dr. Simmons' office when the prognosis came, knowing, and he had let me be tested and evaluated and cleared and scheduled, knowing, and he had held my hand in the surgical waiting room at 5:30 in the morning and looked at me with that weight in his eyes and said thank you, knowing. I picked the phone back up. Are you still there?
I asked. Tessa said yes.
Did he know you were here? In this hospital? In this corridor?
A beat. No.
I was sent to this ward by my own doctor. I didn't know Daniel was here until I arrived yesterday. And then I was going to leave, and then I decided to stay because I thought she stopped. I thought I owed you the truth. I know that seems strange coming from me. I know I'm not in a position to make claims about owing people things. There was something in her voice that was not what I expected. Not guilt performance. Not the managed expression of something rehearsed. Something more raw. Something that sounded like a person who had been sitting alone in a hospital room for 24 hours deciding to do the harder thing. I have one more question, I said. Did he know, when I was being tested and scheduled for the donation, that you and he were involved? Was the relationship ongoing? A silence longer than any of the others. Yes, she said. I asked him to tell you. Multiple times. He said it would affect the donation process if you knew. He said we would talk about everything after. After I gave him an organ. After the recovery. After it was already permanent and couldn't be undone. I put the phone down again.
Gently.
The same way you put down something that has already broken, and you don't want the crack to spread further than it has. The ceiling of room 412 was the same acoustic tile and fluorescent light as the operating room had been. I lay under my blanket, and I looked at it, and I thought in the flat, enormous way that you think when your mind is processing something too large to actually process, just registering dimensions before it can begin to do anything with content. 2 years. She had been in his life for 2 years, which meant she had been there the entire time we were talking about the transplant. She had been there when I went to the first appointment with Dr. Simmons. She had been there through the testing and the matching and the evaluations. She had been there when he squeezed my hand in the pre-surgical waiting room and said thank you with that particular weight. She had been in his phone and his evenings and some portion of his thoughts through all of the 6 weeks in which he cooked elaborate dinners and held my face and told me he didn't deserve me. She had told him to tell me the truth.
He had said it was complicated.
Not complicated. I want to be precise about this. There is nothing complicated about telling someone the truth before you ask them to give you an organ. There is nothing complicated about the basic human obligation of honesty toward a person who loves you freely enough to undergo surgery for you. The word complicated was a word chosen to mean I don't want to because I am afraid of the consequences, and I wanted the benefits of this choice without the cost of it. That is not complicated. That is cowardice. I lay still for a long time. The monitors beeped softly. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. The afternoon moved past the window in slow light. Then I picked up my phone. Brianna came to check my vitals at 2 o'clock and asked if everything was all right. I told her I was fine. My blood pressure, apparently, was doing something reasonable, which is evidence that the human body is capable of spectacular deception when the mind needs it to be. I thanked her. I waited for her to leave. Then I picked up my phone and called Angela. I told Angela what had happened. All of it. The woman next door. The phone call, the 2 years, the timing. Angela was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, Laura, I'm getting in my car right now. You don't have to. I'm getting in my car right now, she said again. Don't do anything until I get there. She arrived at 3:30. I know this because I had been watching the clock on the wall with the specific attention of someone who has nothing to do except wait and who needs the clock to be moving. She came through the door, took one look at my face, and did not say anything. She sat down in the chair beside my bed. She took my hand. She did not ask me how I was doing or tell me it was going to be okay, or offer anything except her presence, which is the specific gift Angela has always had, the ability to simply be there without needing the moment to be different than it is. We sat like that for a long time. The monitors beeped. The light in the room changed angle as the afternoon progressed. He's 4 doors down, I said eventually. I know, she said. She was next door. I know. I looked at the ceiling. She didn't have to call me. She could have been discharged, and I never would have found out. Angela said nothing to this. She just held my hand. I don't know what to do with her, I said. With the fact that she called me. You don't have to do anything with it today, she said. I need to talk to him. Not today. Angela, Laura. Her voice was the voice she had used on me since we were small, the slightly older sister voice that carries a particular authority no amount of adult life fully erases. You had surgery yesterday. You are 1 day out from a major organ donation. You are on pain medication, and you haven't slept properly, and you haven't eaten enough, and your nervous system is doing things it is not designed to do. You are not having that conversation today. You are going to heal. When you are physically stable, when you are on your feet and in your own clothes and in your own kitchen, then you will talk to him. I looked at her. She looked back at me steadily. He's going to be discharged before me, I said. Then he'll be home when you get there. What if he is not going anywhere, she said. And if he does, Carol will find him. But he's not going anywhere. She was right. She is almost always right. It is one of the things I have resented and relied on in equal measure across our entire lives. I spent 4 more days in the hospital. Daniel was discharged on day 3, before me, which meant the last day and a half I was in room 412 without him 4 doors down, without the proximity that had been both comforting and, I now understood, built on a foundation I hadn't known the shape of. Tessa was discharged on day 2. The morning of her discharge, she knocked on my door. I said, come in. She was younger than I had pictured from her voice, maybe 32 or 33. She had the particular look of someone at the tail end of a hospital stay, a little wrung out, pale in the specific way of someone who has not slept well in an unfamiliar place. She stood in the doorway, and she did not try to come further in, which I noted and appreciated. She looked at me across the small room, and I looked at her. There are things you notice. Meeting the person who has been in your husband's life for 2 years. Whether she is what you expected. Whether you can see it, in retrospect, the thing that he found in her that made the calculations seem worth making. I looked at her carefully, and I will be honest. I saw someone who looked very tired and also, despite the tiredness, like someone who had recently decided to do a hard thing and was still carrying the weight of having done it. I don't expect you to say anything to me, she said. I just wanted to say something in person rather than just a phone call. I know there's nothing I can offer that changes what happened. I'm not here to make myself feel better. She paused. I thought you deserved to know the person who called you, not just the concept of her. I looked at her for a moment. Did you know he was sick? When it started? Yes, she said. He told me from the beginning. Did you know he was married? Yes. I let a beat pass. When did you find out about the donation? About 4 months before the surgery was scheduled, she said. She looked at the floor briefly, then back up. I told him he had to tell you the truth before you agreed to anything. I said it more than once over those 4 months. He said it was complicated. He said he would address it after everything with the surgery was resolved. After, I said. After, she confirmed. He kept using that word. Her eyes were red, though she wasn't crying in the moment. I know I should have contacted you myself when he kept refusing. I know that's the thing I did wrong that I actually had control over. I didn't. I'm not making excuses for that. I just wanted you to hear it from me. She left.
The door closed.
I sat in the bed and thought about her for a long time, about the specific choice she had made, about what it had cost her to make it, and what it had meant for me that she did. Here is the truth about Tessa, which I have turned over many times in the years since, and have not been able to make simpler than it is. She did not have to call me. She could have been discharged from room 410 on day 2, and I might not have known for weeks or months or possibly ever. She had her own reasons for calling, reasons that were probably complicated and mixed, and that included self-interest alongside whatever honest motive was also in there, because people are never only one thing. But the result of her choosing to call was that I had the truth before I left that hospital. Before I went back to the house. Before I had dinner with Daniel, or held his hand again, or said something I couldn't take back from a position of not knowing. One honest choice. In a story with very few of them. I am not going to tell you it makes her a good person or that it absolves her. I am going to tell you that I took it for exactly what it was. Daniel came home to our house the day before I was discharged. I had known he was going. Brianna had mentioned it the morning of his discharge, not realizing it required any particular handling, just updating me on the status of the man 4 doors down. I lay in room 412 after Brianna left, and I thought about Daniel going back to our house. To the kitchen we had bought a new table for 18 months ago because the old one was finally falling apart. To the bedroom with the window that caught the morning light in a way we had both loved when we first saw the house and had stopped consciously noticing for years. To all of the accumulated ordinary space of a life that was, it turned out, not what either of us had been living inside. Angela drove me home the following afternoon. She helped me out of the car and up the front steps in the careful way of someone managing a person who is steadier than she looks but not as steady as she says. She had her hand on my elbow. She opened the front door with my key. Daniel was at the kitchen table. Laptop.
Cup of tea.
The look of a man who had spent the preceding day and a half in a house that was suddenly his alone, sitting in the specific way of someone who has rehearsed the next few minutes without being able to land on anything that would actually help him. He looked up when we came in.
His face did something.
He stood instinctively and then seemed to realize standing was not obviously the right choice and sat back down. Angela looked at him once, briefly, with the expression of a woman who does not need to say what she is thinking, and then she went into the other room. I sat down across from him at the kitchen table that we had bought 18 months ago. I sat down across from him. Angela went into the other room. She didn't go far. I looked at my husband across our kitchen table. He looked back at me. He had new color in his face. His eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been in months. He was physically already benefiting from what I had given him. I noticed this the way you notice something you have been prepared to notice, already incorporating it into a picture you are building rather than discovering. Tessa Hale called me, I said, from room 410, while we were both in the hospital. He didn't react dramatically. I had always liked that about Daniel, his steadiness, his reluctance to perform emotions he wasn't having. I did not like it in this moment. I needed something to react to. I know, he said. She told me 2 years, I said. He looked at his hands. Yes. She told me, she asked you to tell me before the surgery, I said. Multiple times. She said you told her it was complicated. He didn't answer that. Daniel, I said, very quietly. I need to hear it from you. Were you involved with her the entire time I was being evaluated for the donation? Was the relationship ongoing when I signed the consent forms? When I had this surgery? He looked up. His eyes were not empty or deflecting. They had in them the specific quality of a man who has stopped trying to manage the moment and is just sitting in it. Yes, he said. One word. The only honest thing he said for the next hour. What followed was a conversation I will not replay in full detail here, because some of it belongs only to the people who were in that kitchen, and because the particular words matter less than what I watched happen across his face while he said them. He talked for a long time. He explained how it had started, a work event, a connection he had told himself was nothing, and then the gradual accumulation of choices that each felt smaller than the one before them until he was so far from where he should have been that he stopped tracking the distance. He said he loved me. He said he had never stopped loving me. He said those two things could both be true, and he had spent 2 years in that impossible space, and it had not been possible after all. He talked about Tessa with the particular care of a man who knows that how he talks about her is being weighed, choosing words that were honest without being affectionate, and watching my face to calibrate whether he was managing this correctly. He was not managing it correctly. There is no correct way to manage it. He said the donation had nothing to do with Tessa, that he had kept the two parts of his life separate, that his desire for me to donate, his love for me, his gratitude, none of it was performed or calculated. He said that sincerely. I believe he believed it. I let him finish. I didn't interrupt once. And when he was done, I let the silence sit for a moment, because I had things to say, and I wanted them to arrive without the noise of whatever he had just said still hanging in the air. "You let me give you a part of my body," I said, "while you were sleeping with someone else."
He started to speak.
"You sat across from me in Dr. Simmons' office," I said, "and you let me be tested and evaluated and matched and prepared and scheduled and consented and prepped and wheeled into an operating room, and every single one of those moments, every appointment, and every consent form, and every 6 a.m. drive to the hospital for blood work, and every evening where you told me you didn't deserve me, you knew. All of it." He said nothing. "You said Tessa asked you to tell me the truth. Multiple times. You said it was complicated. But the only thing that was complicated was that you wanted to keep two things that couldn't coexist, and you had found a way to keep them temporarily, and telling me the truth would have ended that arrangement.
So you didn't tell me.
You let me go into surgery instead." He was looking at the table. "I want to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to hear every word of it. If you had told me the truth, I would not have donated."
Let me be completely clear about that.
"I would have walked out of Dr. Simmons' office, and I would have filed for divorce, and you would have gone on a transplant waiting list like everyone else. I gave you a kidney because I believed I was giving it to a faithful husband who loved me. I gave it to the marriage I thought I had. That marriage did not exist. You were sleeping with someone else the entire time I was being tested and cleared and scheduled and prepped. You held my hand in that waiting room knowing what you knew. You said thank you knowing what you knew. And you let me go into surgery anyway because telling me the truth would have meant no kidney and no marriage and no clean exit, and you wanted all three.
So no.
I would not have made the same decision. I would never have made that decision for the man you actually are." His jaw was tight. He was not, in this moment, a bad man exactly. He was a man who had done a very bad thing, and who was sitting in the kitchen of the life he had compromised and was understanding, finally, fully, what it had cost. "I know," he said. "I know isn't something," I said. "I know is where you start. You haven't started yet." Angela had come to the kitchen doorway. I don't know at what point she'd moved there. She was leaning against the frame, arms crossed, giving me the specific look she has had since we were 12 that means I am here and you're not alone, but this is yours to say, and I'm not going to say it for you. I told Daniel I needed him to leave. That night. Not because I had made a final decision about anything, I told him that clearly, but because I needed to be in my own house without him in it while I figured out what the next thing was. He looked at Angela once. She looked back at him without expression.
He didn't argue.
He called a friend from the hallway. He packed a bag, not efficiently, in the distracted way of a person whose hands are doing something while their mind is still in the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway on his way out and said my name. I was at the kitchen table. I didn't look up.
Not out of cruelty.
Out of the specific self-preservation of a woman who knows that if she looks at the right moment she will see something that will make the wrong thing easier, and she cannot afford that. He left. The door closed. The house was quiet in the way a house is quiet when something that has been in it for a long time is suddenly not. I am going to tell you about the months between Daniel leaving the house and the divorce being finalized, because I think there is something important in them that gets compressed in this kind of story into a quick transitional paragraph, and I don't want to do that. They were not simple months.
I want to be honest about that.
I've already said there were dark nights, and I'll add, there were mornings that were also dark and afternoons, and there were moments in all three that made the floor feel unreliable in ways I had to actively work to stand on. Not because I doubted the decision. I never doubted the decision for a single day. But decisions can be right and still cost something, and what this one cost was the entirety of a life I had built and inhabited for 9 years. All the ordinary accumulated things, the Sunday morning routines, and the particular way we ordered takeout on the nights neither of us felt like cooking, and the specific shorthand of a decade together, and none of that was going to simply stop costing just because the decision was correct. I processed this. I went to therapy, specifically a therapist who dealt with grief and betrayal, who was skilled at not conflating those two things, which are related but are not the same. I called Angela a great deal. I let my friends be present in the way that good friends are when something this large has happened. I let myself feel what I actually felt, including the parts that were sad and not only angry, including the parts that missed him and not only resented him, because I have learned that the feelings that don't get acknowledged find other ways out, and it is better to let them through the front door where you can see them. The divorce process in Tennessee is not a fast thing. There are waiting periods and procedures, and a general assumption that legal dissolution should not be rushed. My divorce attorney, a woman named Carol who came recommended by Angela's own attorney and who had the quality of someone who has heard everything and is genuinely still paying attention, walked me through all of it with precision and without condescension. I want to tell you something about the weeks after Daniel left the house that doesn't get told in these kinds of stories very often. It was not only angry. There were nights that were very dark, nights when I lay in our bedroom, which was still our bedroom in the technical sense because his name was still on the mortgage, and felt the full weight of 9 years and what had been built in them and what would not exist after. There was grief mixed into the fury, real grief, for a marriage I had believed in completely. I let myself feel that grief. I did not use it as a reason to reconsider. I had also discovered, through Carol's research into the financial aspects of the marriage, several things I had not previously known. A joint savings account from which Daniel had been making transfers over the preceding 2 years, small enough individually to avoid triggering attention, consistent enough in pattern to add up to something meaningful. A credit card in his name with charges that I could now, with full context, assign to a category they had not previously had. The 2 years of a parallel relationship have a financial footprint. It is always modest and always present and always, when you look at it with the right information, unmistakable. Carol was thorough. She is the kind of attorney who approaches documentation the way some people approach puzzles, with a specific pleasure in the completeness of the picture. She built a case for the financial side of the divorce that was comprehensive and precise, and that positioned me correctly in relation to the full 10 years of our shared financial life. The house, the retirement accounts, the various accumulated assets of a decade together. She was clear-eyed about what the financial behavior over the 2 years represented and built it into the picture accordingly. I want to be clear about something. I was not interested in punishing Daniel financially. I never have been. I did not go into that process wanting to take everything or leave him with nothing. I went in wanting fairness, which means something specific. The acknowledgement that our shared resources had been partially redirected without my knowledge or consent for 2 years, and that the division of what we had built together should reflect the reality of what had actually been happening rather than the fiction I had been living inside. Those are not the same thing as revenge. They are just the correct accounting. Carol delivered the correct accounting with the efficiency of someone who has done this many times and understands exactly what fair looks like from every angle. During this same period, I saw my own doctors. The left side recovery from a kidney donation is not a short process. I had follow-up appointments, monitoring adjustments. Every one of those appointments was a physical reminder of what I had done, and I made peace with it in the way I said earlier, which is that I stand by the decision as I made it, and I have no regret for the act itself. A human life continues because of what I did. Daniel's life. Whatever I think of Daniel now, his life is worth continuing, and I didn't give my kidney to Daniel the faithful husband. I gave it to Daniel the human being with a failing organ, and that distinction, which took me a while to find, is the one that let me stop being angry at myself for doing it. I called Tessa once, about 6 weeks after the hospital. I want to tell you about that call, because I think it is the part of the story that people find most surprising, and that I am most uncertain about how to explain. I did not call her to extend friendship or forgiveness. I called her with a question. I told her I had one, and that she could choose not to answer it, and I would understand. I asked her if she had known, when she decided to be honest with me, that telling me the truth might end Daniel's marriage. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes. I knew it was likely. And I made the choice to call you anyway.
Why? I said.
Because you had just given him a kidney, she said. Because the least you deserved after that was the truth about your own life. Because I had been the reason that truth was being kept from you, and I owed you something for that, even if what I owed you was just the truth delivered late. I sat with that. Are you still with him?
No, she said.
He called me when you asked him to leave the house. He wanted me to tell you I'd mischaracterized things, that there were details I'd gotten wrong. He wanted me to, I think, walk back what I'd told you. And I told him no. I thanked her. She said she was sorry again, the real kind, and I said I believed her, and we hung up. I have not spoken to her since. Daniel and I were divorced 9 months after the hospital stay. The settlement was handled by Carol with the efficiency of someone who has done this many times and knows what fair looks like from every angle. I kept the house. We divided the retirement accounts in the proportion that reflected the actual history of contributions across the marriage, which Carol had documented precisely. The financial transfers were factored in. He signed the papers on a Thursday morning in Carol's office, with his own attorney present, and I sat across from him, and I watched his pen move across the documents. He was wearing a gray sweater I recognized. It was the kind of detail that catches you, the specific ordinary reality of the person across the table from you having clothes you recognize, a face you know, a history that is also your history. 9 years is a long time. It is long enough to love someone genuinely, and to know them thoroughly, and to have built something that was real, even if the ground beneath it turned out to be different from what you believed. I knew all of that while I watched him sign. When it was done, we stood in the hallway outside Carol's office, waiting for the elevator together in the slightly absurd way of people whose formal business is concluded and who are not sure what the correct behavior is in the remaining 30 seconds of proximity.
He looked at me.
He said he was sorry. He said it the way he had been saying it across the months, in various forms, texts and a voicemail and a letter, all of which I had received and read and set down without responding to, because there wasn't a response that was both true and useful. I believed his sorry. I believe it now. People are generally sorry when the consequences have caught up with them. That is not complicated to believe. What I don't believe is that sorry is the right unit of measurement for what happened, or that sorry is sufficient reason to arrive at a different place than the one I arrived at. The elevator came. We went in opposite directions.
He has my kidney.
His body has incorporated it, the way bodies do when a transplant is successful, and it functions as it was supposed to function, doing the work that a kidney does, keeping him alive. He is healthy as far as I know.
He has the time that health provides.
What he does with that time is entirely his own business now, in every sense, and I mean that without irony. I gave it freely. I gave it to his life, not to his character or his choices. The life continues. The choices are his. I have the house. I have Angela, who drove 4 hours from Memphis at 3:30 in the afternoon when I needed her, and has not once in all the time since made me feel like a burden for it. I have my dogs, both of whom are excellent company and ask very little. I have the vegetable garden that is doing better than anyone expected. I have the knowledge that when the hardest thing I ever did was asked of me, I did not flinch from it, and that the hardest thing and the betrayal were not the same thing, and that one does not contaminate the other. I am sometimes asked if I regret not doing something more dramatic. If I wish I had confronted Daniel in the hospital. If there is something I hold back when I tell the story. People seem to want there to be a moment where I swept through a hospital corridor in a surgical gown and said something unforgettable. That is not what happened. What happened is that I lay in a hospital bed and absorbed the information and called my sister and healed, and then, when I was stable, I did what needed to be done one step at a time with a very good attorney. That is the dramatic moment, I think, even if it doesn't look like one. The moment you decide not to fall apart. The moment you understand that the most powerful thing available to you is your own clarity, and that clarity held quietly and deployed precisely is more powerful than anything you could say in a hospital corridor on the day after surgery. I am 38 years old. I have 1 kidney and a 7-inch scar on my left side that has faded from pink to white over time, which is what scars do when you take care of yourself and give them enough time. I have a house that I bought with my own money after the divorce settlement, Slightly smaller than the house I'd shared with Daniel, but with a garden that I planted myself and a kitchen window that catches the afternoon light at an angle I love. I have 2 dogs. I have Angela, who calls twice a week and comes to visit once a month, and who has never once since that hospital day said anything that put the weight of any of this in a place where it didn't belong. I have friends who knew the marriage and were honest about their relief when it ended, which I appreciated more than any performed neutrality would have been. I have a job I am good at, and that I return to having been glad I left it that morning. What I do not have is the part where I tell you I eventually forgave him. I have heard from a few people, since the story began to circulate in the way stories do, that this is the part they find difficult. That they feel the story would be more complete with forgiveness. That the healing is more real when it includes a release of the thing that was done. I want to address that directly because I think it deserves a direct answer. I have not spent 3 years inactive, consuming resentment toward Daniel. That is not what no forgiveness means. It does not mean I think about him constantly or that I have organized my emotional life around what he did. I have not. I have been busy building something else, and the something else is good, and it takes up the space that resentment would have otherwise occupied. I wish him no specific harm. I do not pray for his life to go badly. But forgiveness in the sense that people usually mean it, the release of a person from the full moral weight of what they chose to do, the exoneration, the wiping of the ledger, is not something I have done for Daniel, and I am not going to perform it here for the sake of a story that ends with grace. Because the thing that happened was not graceless. I handled it with a great deal of grace, I think. I healed. I built. I did not let what he did become the center of my identity. But grace is not the same as absolution. You can carry yourself with dignity through the consequences of someone's choices without releasing them from those choices. Both things can be true. He knew for 2 years. Through every appointment and evaluation and consent form. Through every weekend dinner and every you don't deserve me and every squeeze of the hand in the pre-surgical waiting room. He chose, again and again in small and medium and large moments, to keep the truth from the person it belonged to most. He did this because telling the truth would have complicated things for him. And I was in surgery the same morning he was. And I came out of that surgery with 7 inches of scar, and something missing and the complete, sincere, undeceived belief that I had done it for the right reasons.
He has my kidney.
It is inside him right now, doing the work of keeping him alive, which is what I gave it to do. I do not want it back. I do not spend time thinking about it being inside him. It is simply there, doing its job, and I am here doing mine. He does not have my forgiveness. He will not. This is not a cliff I am waiting to step off the edge of. It is simply the truth of where I am and where I intend to stay. I am, on balance, doing beautifully. Better than anyone expected, including me. The vegetable garden is particularly good this year. The dogs are excellent company. The kitchen window catches the light every afternoon, and I stand in it sometimes, for a minute, just to feel it on my face. That is enough. It turns out it is more than enough. If you stayed all the way to the end of this, thank you. Please subscribe and leave a comment. You deserve to know the truth about your own life, and you deserve to know it before you are asked to give anything you cannot take back.